having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Okay, let's unpack this. What we're diving into today is, a really intense, fast-moving situation out in Los Angeles right now. We're looking at recent federal immigration enforcement actions, the significant protests and clashes that followed, and, pretty controversial decision to deploy the National Guard. We've pulled together a stack of sources for this deep dive. Articles and reports that give us a snapshot of what was happening in LA specifically as of Sunday, June 8th, 2025.
That's right. And our mission here is to take these sources and really understand the core of what's going on. We want to trace the timeline, pull out the key events, explore the different perspectives being presented in these reports, and really dig into what the deployment of the National Guard signifies, in this specific context.
Exactly. Think of this as your way to quickly get informed on a complex story that's, still unfolding. So let's jump right into the sources. They seem to point to Friday, June 6th as the day things really escalated.
That's definitely where the tension started mounting. On Friday, ICE immigration and customs enforcement officials were conducting a series of operations across Los Angeles County. The reports mention federal search warrants being served at multiple locations.
Right, multiple places.
Exactly, and they specifically highlight a clothing warehouse in the Fashion District as one key site.
And these weren't just investigations, they led to actual detentions, right?
Yeah,
a wave of...
Absolutely. The initial figures reported on Friday mentioned, 44 arrests. But by Saturday, the numbers from the sources had climbed quite a bit, indicating over 120 people had been detained. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, they put out statements clarifying that some of those detained allegedly had ties to criminal organizations or prior criminal histories.
Okay, but even with that official explanation, the sources say immigrant rights advocates immediately voiced pretty significant concerns about transparency, legality.
For sure, and that, according to the reports we looked at, was the immediate fuel for the public outrage.
The spark, basically.
It certainly seems like it. The protests kicked off almost instantly on Friday evening. Reports placed the initial demonstrations outside a federal building downtown, apparently where some detainees were being held.
And you can tell the atmosphere was already charged from the start. The sources describe chants like, set them free, let them stay, and some graffiti appearing on the federal building itself.
Yeah, and that intensity definitely didn't fade by Saturday. If anything, it spread. The demonstrations moved beyond just downtown LA to other parts of the county. Paramount and Compton are specifically cited in the sources as key locations where things really heated up.
Tell us about what happened there. What did the sources actually describe?
Well, in Paramount, near a Home Depot, reports say protesters directly confronted federal agents. They were attempting to block vehicles, clearly showing their anger over the immigration operations. The situation there seems to have escalated quite rapidly.
How did that escalation manifest? What were people doing based on the reports?
We see reports of protesters throwing objects, things like rocks, even pieces of concrete apparently at law enforcement vehicles. Federal agents, including Border Patrol and other DHS personnel, they responded by deploying riot gear.
Riot gear, okay.
Yeah, and they used tear gas, flashbang explosives, and pepper balls to try and, disperse the crowds.
And Compton saw similar volatile scenes. It wasn't just Paramount.
No, similar story in Compton. During an anti-ICE demonstration there, one vehicle was reportedly set on fire. Images circulated showing burning cars, graffiti. It looked pretty intense. The LA County Sheriff's Department sent over 100 deputies to Paramount alone. Sheriff Robert Luna is quoted in sources stating the crowd there grew to between 350 and 400 people, and that it definitely became violent.
So even heading into Sunday, June 8th, The protests were still very much active, no sign of stopping.
Not at all. They continued in downtown Los Angeles with calls for mass mobilization outside Los Angeles City Hall. And the sources describe clashes between protesters and law enforcement intensifying further on Sunday.
And it wasn't just the local police involved by then, was it? Federal officers, too.
No, you're right. Federal officers were heavily involved by Sunday. They were described as wearing identifying patches, ICE, FBI, and carrying rifles. Tear gas was used again to disperse crowds, this time outside the Metropolitan Detention Center downtown.
So more tear gas.
Yeah. And the LAPD declared unlawful assemblies in several areas, issued dispersal orders, and made multiple arrests. Their count, as of Sunday morning, was 29 arrests, primarily for failure to disperse.
And one of those arrests was kind of a notable figure, wasn't he? According to the reports.
Yes, David Huerta. He's the regional president of CIU California, the Service Employees International Union. He was reportedly among those arrested, accused of impeding immigration agents.
Right, so this escalating unrest, the growing size, the intensity of the clashes, this seems to be what directly triggered the big federal response we mentioned earlier, the National Guard.
That's definitely the connection the sources make. On Saturday, June 7th, President Trump signed a memorandum. It ordered the deployment of at least 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles County. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed this mobilization pretty quickly on social media. He said troops would deploy immediately.
Immediately, wow.
And I added a warning that active duty Marines from Camp Pendleton could be mobilized if the violence didn't stop.
Wow, the possibility of bringing in the Marines, that's a serious escalation. And guards started arriving quickly.
Very quickly. Early Sunday morning, elements of the California National Guard's 79th Infantry Brigade combat team began arriving. Initial reports put around 300 troops on the ground across 3 locations in the greater LA area.
300 to start.
Right. And according to the sources, their stated primary mission was the protection of federal property and personnel.
But we saw images confirming this, troops in camouflage outside federal buildings, vehicles moving through areas like Paramount that you mentioned.
That's correct. Now, this federal deployment has, perhaps unsurprisingly, really ignited a significant political dispute. The sources highlight this quite a bit. California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass have been very vocal in their strong objections to this move.
How have they characterized the president's decision? What kind of language did they use? The sources mentioned.
They used really strong terms, things like unnecessary and purposely inflammatory. They stated the deployment was designed to, quote, manufacture a crisis or create a spectacle of force. Governor Newsom is quoted directly accusing the federal government of sowing chaos so they can have an excuse to escalate.
Sowing chaos.
Yeah. And Mayor Baz also explicitly voiced concerns that bringing in the National Guard could actually worsen tensions on the ground, not help.
So, clear, strong pushback from the state and local leaders. How did President Trump defend his decision against that criticism? What was his rationale?
Well, speaking from Camp David, and later on his social media platform, Truth Social, President Trump defended the deployment forcefully. He consistently labeled the events in Los Angeles a riot, not a protest.
The clear distinction he was making.
Very clear. And he emphasized the need for very strong law and order. He publicly criticized both Newsom and Bass, calling them incompetent and very slow, and praised the National Guard for doing a job well done.
So direct criticism of the state leadership.
Yes. And he also made a pretty notable statement regarding the threshold for sending in U.S. Marines. He said, the bar was what I say it is.
What I say it is.
Signaling a clear willingness for further potentially escalating federal intervention if he deemed it necessary.
That raises an interesting point. The sources touch on the legal implications, right? The president making this move unilaterally, seemingly over the objections of the governor.
It absolutely does. Typically, when you see the National Guard deployed within a state for domestic issues, it's done at the request of the state's governor. That's the usual way. However, the president does have the power to federalize National Guard units and deploy them under specific circumstances, often by invoking the Insurrection Act.
The Insurrection Act, okay.
Right. This act allows the use of armed forces to suppress an insurrection or enforce federal laws when state authorities are seen as unable or unwilling to do so.
And there's also that principle about using the military domestically, the Posse Comitatus Act, correct? How does that fit in?
Yes, the Posse Comitatus Act generally prohibits the use of the U.S. military for domestic law enforcement purposes. But, like many laws, exceptions exist. And one key exception is when authorized by another law, such as invoking the Insurrection Act.
Okay. So it creates a kind of legal gray area or debate.
Yeah. Exactly. It creates a legal debate about the basis and appropriateness of the president's action here. Critics, like Senator Jack Reed, he's the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, are quoted blasting Trump's unilateral decision as risking further escalation of an already tense situation.
Stepping back a bit, it really feels like these events in LA are highlighting much broader pre-existing tensions around immigration policy across the whole country.
Absolutely. I mean, ICE enforcement operations have always been a point of contention, particularly in communities with large immigrant populations. That's not new. But the perceived intensity and scale of these recent operations, combined with the rapid large-scale protests and then this very forceful federal response, it seems to have brought these underlying tensions right to a boiling point.
And the sources show us public figures on both sides are heavily involved, actually, on the ground.
They do. For instance, Congresswoman Maxine Waters was reportedly seen confronting National Guard troops, questioning their presence. That really underscores the political nature of this.
Right.
On the other side, figures like Republican Assemblyman Bill Asately have publicly defended the federal actions and criticized those they view as impeding law enforcement. So, strong views on both sides.
It's fascinating, too, how the events themselves are being described so differently, depending on who you listen to.
Yeah.
The sources point this out as a key element, don't they?
Precisely. You see news organizations providing extensive coverage, but within that, there's clearly a riots in LA narrative being pushed by some.
Often those supporting the federal response?
Generally, yes. Versus a protests in LA narrative used by others, often those critical of the federal actions and the ICE operations to begin with. And that debate over the very nature of the events, are they riots requiring forceful intervention, or are they legitimate protests against government action, that really reflects the deep political polarization we see?
Yeah.
Polarization around immigration, civil liberties, law enforcement authority. It's all wrapped up in that language. It's more than just semantics. It reflects fundamentally different ways of seeing what's happening and why.
So, looking at these sources, as of Sunday evening, June 8th, the situation was still very much active, in motion.
Absolutely. It remained highly fluid and tense. Protests were continuing, the National Guard was deployed and very visible, and the political rhetoric between state and federal leaders was, well, heated and showing no signs of cooling down.
And the sources make it clear this isn't necessarily a situation that just resolves overnight. There's an expectation of more.
It seems so. Representative Nanette Barragan was cited, indicating that ICE enforcement and removal operations are expected to continue daily for the next 30 days in LA County.
For another month? Wow.
Yeah, that specific detail from the sources suggests that tensions might remain high and could potentially flare up again in the coming weeks. So what these events in Los Angeles really underscore, looking across these various sources, is this really complex and often volatile interplay between federal actions, the reactions of local communities and authorities, the exercise of civil liberties through protests, and, frankly, the potential for significant civil unrest in a major American city.
Right. And it forces you, as a listener, to look beyond just the sequence of events and consider what it means that people are viewing them through such radically different lenses. You know, given the starkly conflicting descriptions of riots versus protests and this very strong disagreement between federal and state leaders on the right response, what does this whole situation reveal about the different ways people currently view and maybe value immigration enforcement, the right to civil demonstration, and the extent of federal authority in the USA right now? It's definitely a lot to consider, and some of these sources certainly leave you reflecting on.
Breaking news from the stadium tonight as an anonymous fan foot the bill for 55,000 hot dogs, bringing that sweet tubed meat to everyone in attendance.
Free dogs! Yeah!
55,000 hot dogs? What does that even cost? While the identity of this Frankfurter philanthropist remains anonymous, their all-beefy generosity will go down in history.
The new Mega Millions. More to win means more to give. How you spend it is up to you.
Yeah!
For game odds and details, visit SCEducationLottery.com.
Bubba Wallace here from 2311 Racing. Funny thing about being fast, you end up waiting a lot. First to show up, first in line, then just waiting. Me, I rev up Chumba Casino. With over 200 social casino games, no slow lanes here. Why sit around when you can spin? I'm already racing. Your turn. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.